They say human memory is a pencil sketch, a fragile collection of gray lines that eventually fade into nothingness, leaving only a blank, indifferent sheet of paper. But they are wrong, because for a man like me, the world was never a drawing. It was a cold, pulsating grid of pure, unforgiving mathematics. I never saw faces. I saw statistical deviations. I never heard voices. I heard the frequency of lies and the rhythmic vibration of greed. And for a long time, I believed I was the only one who had the key to the vault of reality. I wasn't just a gambler. I was a god of the spread. A man who could look at a flickering screen in a dark room and see the exact moment a market would collapse or a heart would stop beating. And all I needed was a pencil and a stack of napkins to rewrite my own destiny. 5 years ago, my life was a smudge of charcoal on a damp basement wall. A suffocating existence that smelled of cheap instant noodles, stale cigarette smoke, and the metallic tang of absolute desperation, where the only thing keeping me from the edge was a woman named Anna. She was my constant, the only perfect integer in a universe of jagged fractions. The one who stayed when the lights were cut and the ink in my pens ran dry, whispering that I was a genius, even when my hands were shaking so hard I couldn't hold a spoon. We lived in the shadows of the city, eating dust and dreaming of gold, while I spent 18 hours a day tracing the movements of the global markets, searching for the God particle of finance, the one flaw in the code that would let me bleed the world dry. I remember the night the line finally straightened out. The air in the basement was freezing, my breath blooming in the dark like a ghost. And suddenly, the noise of the world vanished, replaced by a crystalline silence where the numbers finally spoke my name. I found the back door, the structural weakness in the house of cards, and I didn't just walk through it. I tore the door off its hinges. The money didn't just come. It erupted, a violent black geyser of wealth that swallowed our poverty in a single, breathless week, carrying us out of the dirt and into a glass tower that touched the stars. For 5 years, I was the invisible hand, the ghost in the machine who turned $1,000 into $1 billion, while the rest of the world scrambled for crumbs. And I did it all from a leather chair, in a room that felt like the bridge of a spaceship. I bought the city, I bought the silence, and I bought a life for Anna that was made of silk and diamonds. A life so perfect it should have terrified me from the very start. We were the undisputed masters of the grid, living in a sterile paradise where every whim was a command and every risk was a calculated victory. But even a man who controls the numbers eventually forgets that the house always has a hidden hand. I grew bored of the winning. The certainty of success became a numb, suffocating weight, and I decided to make one final, apocalyptic play trade, so massive it would shatter the foundation of the exchange and allow me to disappear into the white noise of history forever. It was a Thursday, the day the graphite always seems to snap, and I sat at my desk, watching the green pulse of the monitors, feeling like a soldier on the eve of a victory that would never end. I authorized the leverage, I triggered the buy orders, and I waited for the world to bow. But the green didn't stay. It flickered once, a jagged spark of violet, and then the screen bled red, a deep, arterial red that washed over my face like a physical stain as the numbers I had spent a lifetime mastering suddenly turned into a swarm of angry hornets. The algorithm didn't just fail, it committed suicide, turning inward and devouring its own logic with a speed that defied physics, vaporizing my accounts, my offshore reserves, and my very identity in a matter of seconds. I sat there in the silence of the penthouse, the only sound a faint hum of the air conditioning, realizing that I was no longer a billionaire, I was a ghost, standing in a glass grave. The fall was a free fall into the mouth of a monster. The shadows I had ignored for years, the collectors, the syndicates, the men who operate in the ink-black margins of the law, they came for me, not with lawsuits, but with the cold, silent threat of erasure. We fled into the night, leaving the silk and the glass behind, retreating back into the labyrinth of the city's underbelly, moving from one nameless motel to another, while the neon signs outside buzzed like dying insects. I was a broken machine, my mind a static-filled void, but Anna was the iron in my soul. She didn't cry, She didn't blame me for the ruin. She just held my head in her lap in those shivering motel rooms and told me that the world was still just a set of variables and that I was the only one who could solve for X. She became my hands when mine wouldn't stop trembling. She was the one who scouted the streets, who bought the burner phones, who kept the shadows at bay while I tried to find the thread of the new reality. She told me the only way to win was to double down, to build a weapon out of our own destruction, and she risked everything to sneak back into the heart of the city, to steal the raw data I needed to build the second coming of the zero-sum protocol. Every time I heard the door of our motel room click shut behind her, I felt a physical pang of terror, a jagged line of anxiety cutting through my chest. Wondering if this was the moment the probability finally reached zero. I would sit in the dark, my only light the flickering blue glow of a cracked laptop screen, listening to the drip of a leaky faucet that sounded like a countdown clock. I began to see the world differently then. I wasn't looking for patterns of wealth anymore. I was looking for patterns of survival. I studied the way the dust settled on the floor, the way the shadows moved across the ceiling, searching for a sign that I was still the architect of my own life. Anna would return at dawn, her face pale, her eyes filled with a terrifying cold light, handing me encrypted drives that felt like pieces of a dead god. She told me that the corporations were hunting us, that the black-suited men were closing the circle, but that they were also afraid. They were afraid of what I could build when I had nothing left to lose. And she was right. Desperation is the most powerful catalyst in the universe. It strips away the noise and leaves only the signal. I stopped being a man and became a processor. I stopped eating, I stopped sleeping, I stopped feeling the cold. I lived entirely within the blue light, my fingers dancing over the keys in a frantic rhythmic ritual, rewriting the very fabric of my soul into a predatory code. I built the monster. I called it the Obsidian Loop. It wasn't designed to trade, it was designed to consume. It was a mathematical virus that fed on the liquidity of others, a ghost that would haunt the servers of the global exchange and drain them of their essence before they even knew they were infected. When I finally pushed the button, I didn't feel triumph. I felt a cold, hollow vacuum. I watched as the red digits on the screen began to flip back to green, but it wasn't the warm green of my old life. It was a harsh neon glare that looked like toxic waste. We began to rise again, but it was a violent, jagged ascent, a climb fueled by the wreckage of others. We returned to the city not as citizens, but as occupiers. We bought a new penthouse, higher than the last, more fortified, more isolated, but the silence inside was different now. It wasn't the silence of peace, it was the silence of a tomb. I looked at my hands and saw they were permanently stained with the ink of my own creation. A blackness that no amount of expensive soap could wash away. I looked at Anna, and for the first time in 7 years, I didn't see my constant. I saw a stranger who had walked through hell and likes the heat. She had changed. Her movements were too precise, her smiles too rehearsed, her eyes always calculating something I couldn't see. I began to wonder if I was still the one holding the pencil, or if I was just a line she was drawing to suit her own purposes. I started to hide things from her, not money, but thoughts. I began to keep a secondary log, a hidden file within the Obsidian Loop that tracked not the markets, but her. I told myself it was just a precaution, a habit of a man who had lost everything once. But deep down, I knew it was the first drop of poison in the well. I watched her through the security cameras I had installed, seeing her move through the penthouse like a ghost, her face a mask of perfect indifference. I watched her talk on encrypted lines, her voice a low murmur I couldn't decode. And then I found the folder. It wasn't hidden. It was sitting in her safe, a black leather binder that looked like it belonged in the archive of impossible objects. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird as I opened it, and the world began to dissolve. Inside were not bank statements, but reports, psychological profiles, my profiles. I saw dates from 5 years ago, back when we were still in the basement. I saw notes on my stress levels, my reaction to the first millions, my vulnerability to loss. And then I found the section titled, The Catalyst. It was a blueprint for my own destruction. It was a plan written in her immaculate hand to trigger the first crash. She hadn't just watched me fail. She had engineered the kill switch. She had orchestrated the collectors, the motels. The fear was all a controlled environment designed to force my brain to evolve, to push me to the point of near suicide, so that I would unlock the final, most predatory version of the algorithm. She was a gardener, and I was a plant she had pruned by cutting off my limbs to see how I would grow back. Every tear she wiped away was fake. Every word of encouragement was a tactical prompt. She didn't love me. She was optimizing me. She was a puppeteer, and I was the marionette that had finally finished carving its own strings. The revelation didn't hit me like a sudden wave. It was more like a slow-acting acid, eating through the floor of my reality until I was suspended in a vacuum of my own making. I stood there in the center of her mahogany-lined study, the black binder heavy in my hands, listening to the silence of $100 million tomb and realizing that every "I love you" had been a line of code, every touch a diagnostic test, and every shared dream a carefully constructed simulation designed to keep the subject me within the desired parameters of productivity. I began to flip through the pages faster, my breath coming in jagged, shallow hitches, as I found the financial ledgers that proved she wasn't just a partner, but a primary stakeholder in the very corporations I thought I was raiding. She was playing both sides of the board, using my genius to sharpen the blade and using their capital to test the edge. And I was the only one in the room who didn't know the game was rigged from the first move. I saw the logs of our nights in those rotting motels, and I realized that the men in the black suits weren't collectors. They were her security team, keeping the assets safe while the desperation protocol ran its course. I felt a hysterical laugh bubbling up in my throat, a dry, rattling sound that tasted of graphite and ash because I had spent my life trying to outrun the shadows, only to discover that the person holding the lantern was the one casting the longest shadow of all. I looked at the handwriting, her elegant, slanted script, and it looked like a trail of dead insects across the white paper, a series of black marks that had effectively erased the last 7 years of my life. I wasn't a husband, I wasn't a partner, I wasn't even a man anymore. I was a proprietary piece of software, a biological processor that she had overclocked until my heart was a red line and my brain was a storm of static. The penthouse began to feel like it was shrinking, the walls of glass pressing in on me like the sides of a terrarium, and I looked out at the city lights and saw not a grid of opportunity, but a massive, flickering cage where everyone was a variable and no one was free. I went back to my own workstation, my movements mechanical and heavy, and I opened the obsidian loop, the monster I had built to save us. I looked at the code, the beautiful, predatory lines of logic that had brought the world to its knees, and I saw her fingerprints all over it. I saw the subtle hooks she had inserted, the back doors she had kept open, the way she had guided my hand to build a system that wouldn't just make us rich, but would give her absolute control over the pulse of the market itself. I was the architect, but she was the owner of the land, the air, and the gravity that made the building stay up. I felt a sudden, violent urge to take a hammer to the monitors, to smash the glass into 1,000 shimmering shards, and walk out of the door with nothing but the clothes on my back. But I knew that wasn't an option. You can't walk away from a math problem once you've solved it. The answer follows you everywhere, etched into the back of your eyelids. I sat down in the darkness, the only light the flickering blue glow of the server racks, and I began to do what I do best. I began to calculate. I began to look for the error in her equation, the one thing she hadn't accounted for in her psychological profiling of the broken genius. She thought she knew me because she had the data, but data is just a ghost of the past, and I was currently living in a future she hadn't written yet. I began to rewrite the obsidian loop, but I didn't do it with the frantic energy of a man in a motel room. I did it with the cold, surgical precision of a man who was already dead. I started to weave a new thread into the code, a zero variable that would act as a silent, invisible parasite within her own system. I wasn't going to take the money and run. I was going to turn the money into poison. I was going to make the wealth so toxic that it would dissolve every bank account it touched, starting with hers and ending with the very corporations that had funded my destruction. I worked through the night, the graphite pencil in my hand, snapping over and over as I sketched out the logic on the margins of her own reports, feeling a strange sense of liberation in the act of total sabotage. I was the one holding the eraser now. I was the one who was going to smudge the lines of her perfect future until there was nothing left but a black stain on a white sheet. As the first light of dawn began to gray the edges of the penthouse, I heard the soft, familiar chime of the elevator. She was coming back. I didn't close the binder. I didn't hide the files. I just sat there, my hands covered in the dust of broken pencils, waiting for the woman I loved to walk through the door and see the monster she had finally succeeded in creating. I heard her footsteps on the marble, that rhythmic predatory click that I used to mistake for the sound of safety. And I realized that the cold I felt wasn't from the air conditioning. It was the sensation of a heart finally reaching absolute zero. She walked into the room, her soap coat shimmering like oil on water, and she stopped when she saw the binder on my desk. She didn't gasp. She didn't offer frantic explanation. She just stood there, her face a mask of perfect, terrifying composure. And for a long, agonizing minute, we just looked at each other across the gap of our shared lies. "I knew you'd find it eventually," she said, her voice as smooth and indifferent as a polished stone. "In fact, I predicted you'd find it 3 days ago. You're actually running a bit behind schedule, Elias." The way she said my name like a label on a specimen jar made my skin crawl. And I realized that even my discovery of her betrayal was probably just another milestone in her project. "Why?" I asked, and the words sounded small and pathetic in the vast empty space of the penthouse. Why the motels? Why the fear? Why not just ask me to build it? She took a step toward me, and I saw the light reflect in her eyes, turning them into two cold glass marbles. "Because you wouldn't have built it for money, and you wouldn't have built it for power," she whispered, her voice a low, hypnotic hum. "You're a creature of friction, Elias. You only create when you're being crushed. If I had given you everything, you would have become soft. You would have become a painter who never touches a brush. I didn't destroy you. I finished you. I took the raw material of your potential and I hammered it into a shape that can actually change the world. You should be thanking me. Look at what you've achieved. You've solved the unsolvable. You've built a system that makes the concept of a market obsolete. You're a god now, and I'm the one who gave you the throne." I looked at her and I didn't see a woman anymore. I saw a void in the shape of a human, a black hole that had consumed everything I ever was, and was now asking for more. I realized then that she didn't just want the algorithm. She wanted the feeling of being the one who owned the man who built it. She was the ultimate knocked Thrat, Knox, the ultimate gambler, and I was the biggest bet she had ever placed. I stood up, the chair scraping against the floor like a scream, and I walked over to the window, looking out at the city that was now mine in name, but hers in reality. "The throne is empty, Anna," I said, and my voice sounded like it was coming from a long way off. "I didn't build a throne, I built a coffin, and I've already climbed inside." I saw the first flicker of something that wasn't indifference cross her face, a tiny microscopic twitch of the eyelid, a fracture in the mask. She walked over to the monitor, her eyes scanning the code at the obsidian loop, looking for the security she thought she had installed. I watched as she realized that the lines were moving. I watched as she saw the zero variable begin to replicate, spreading through the architecture of the system like an ink stain on a silk dress. "What have you done?" she hissed, her fingers flying over the keyboard, trying to intercept the command. "You're destroying it. You're destroying everything we built." I felt a smile spread across my face, a jagged, broken thing that felt like a scar. "We didn't build anything, Anna," I said. "You drew a sketch, and I just spilled the ink. You wanted a monster? Well, here it is. It's a monster that doesn't care about profit. It's a monster that doesn't care about data. It's just a black line, moving through the world, erasing every variable it finds until the result is zero. Just like you taught me. Just like the motels. Just like the basement. Everything back to zero." I watched as the screens began to turn black, one by one, the red and green digits vanishing into a void that no one could fill. I watched as her bank accounts, her shell companies, her corporate holdings began to dissolve into a sea of not found errors. She began to scream then, a high, thin sound that didn't sound like a god at all. It sounded like a frightened child realized that the lights were never coming back on. But I didn't feel anything. I just sat back down in my chair and took out my pencil. I found a fresh sheet of paper, a clean white sheet that had never been touched by a lie, and I began to draw. I didn't draw graphs. I didn't draw houses. I didn't draw houses. I didn't draw her. I just drew a single straight line, stretching from one edge of the paper to the other. A line that didn't lead anywhere and didn't mean anything. It was the only honest thing I had left. The penthouse began to grow dark as the power was cut, the city below fading into a gray smudge as the markets collapsed and the lights went out in the buildings I had once calculated the value of. I sat there in the silence, listening to her sobbing in the corner, and I realized that the archive was finally complete. Every betrayal, every formula, every moment of pain was finally filed away in a place where it could never hurt me again. I was the man who had looked through the keyhole of his own life and gone blind. But in the darkness, I could finally see the truth, that the only way to win a game that's rigged is to burn the board. I am sitting here now, the graphite of my pencil staining my fingers one last time, waiting for the shadows to finish what they started. The air smells of ozone and expensive perfume and old regrets, and the silence is a beautiful, heavy blanket that covers everything. My name doesn't matter. My wealth doesn't matter. I am just a smudge on a blank page, a ghost in a dead machine, a variable that has finally been canceled out. If you're listening to this, don't look for the patterns. Don't try to solve the equation. Just put down the pencil and walk into the sun while you still can. Because once the ink starts to bleed, there's no way to stop the stain. The story is over, the lines are finished, and the result is finally, beautifully, perfectly, zero. I leaned forward, the smell of burnt coffee and ozone from the overheating server racks filling my lungs like a toxic drug, and I realized that the second climb wasn't going to be about luxury. It was going to be about a cold, mechanical revenge that I hadn't even named yet. We moved from the motel with the flickering neon sign to a basement in a part of the city where the streetlights were all broken. A place where the concrete seemed to soak up the sound of human suffering and turn it into a low-frequency hum that vibrated in my teeth. Anna was always there, a pale ghost in the corner of my vision, feeding me data like she was stoking a furnace, and I never questioned where the coal was coming from. I spent 14 days without seeing the sun, my skin turning the color of old parchment, my eyes becoming two bloodshot craters fixed on the glowing blue altar of the monitors. I began to write the obsidian loop, but I didn't write it in Python or Sebenfly. I wrote it in a language of pure malice, a recursive logic that didn't just look for profit, it looked for the structural weaknesses in the egos of the men who ran the hedge funds. I realized that a market isn't a collection of assets. It's a collection of nervous systems. And if you can find the frequency of their collective panic, you can play them like a piano. I remember the exact moment the first loop closed. The code began to replicate itself. A digital cancer that I had designed to be benign until it reached a critical mass. And then it would turn predatory. I watched the data streams. Billions of bits of information moving past my eyes so fast they became a blur. But I could see the patterns, the tiny microscopic tremors in the high-frequency trading algorithms that signaled the beginning of the end for my enemies. I wasn't just back in the game, I was the one who had rewritten the rules while everyone else was still playing by the old ones. Anna would come back from her excursions with more drives, more keys, her clothes smelling of expensive cigar smoke and rain, and she would tell me stories of the men she had to manipulate to get the information. I felt a twisted sense of pride, a dark, oily satisfaction that she was doing this for me, for us, for the empire we were rebuilding out of the rubble of our first life. We started seeing the results in the new, sudden, unexplained liquidity crunches in firms that had once tried to short my soul, glitches in the clearinghouses that wiped out years of gains in a single afternoon. I was the invisible hand, the ghost in the wiring, And every time a decimal point moved in my favor, I felt a surge of dopamine that was better than any drug I had ever taken. But the higher we climbed, the more the air started to taste like copper. We moved into the new penthouse, a fortress of black marble and tinted glass that looked out over the city like a god's balcony. But I couldn't stop thinking about the basement. I couldn't stop thinking about the way the graphite felt under my fingernails when I had nothing. I began to realize that the obsidian loop wasn't just a tool, it was a mirror. It was showing me the truth about the world, which is that everything is replaceable. Everything is a variable and nothing is sacred. I started to apply that logic to Anna. I started to track her movements through the penthouse with the same clinical detachment I used to track the Nikki 225. I saw the way she looked at the monitors when she thought I wasn't watching, not with love, but with a cold professional curiosity. Like a scientist observing a particularly successful culture in a petri dish, I began to wonder if I was the creator of the loop, or if I was just the most advanced piece of data within it. The paranoia didn't come all at once. It was a slow accumulation of small discrepancies. A phone call she ended too quickly. A file on her laptop that was encrypted with a key I didn't recognize. The way she knew exactly when the shadow collectors were. That's it. I walked until the rain took everything. No more numbers, no more name. Just some guy in the rain. Look, I cut this short on purpose. If you made it this far, thank you. If this far, thank you. If this vibe hit you. If you want me to keep going, finish the story. Make it crazier or darker. Smash that like button right now. I'll see the numbers and know if you actually want more. No like equals I stop here.